Most cities have a recognized centre where the lights are brightest, the crowds thickest, and the traffic noisiest. And in present-day Dublin, there's no doubt about the position of this focal point. But to find the historic centre of Dublin, we must walk westwards, 4 bridges and half a mile westwards, to the less frequented neighbourhood around Christ Church Cathedral. It needs a heroic effort of the imagination to picture a Viking longboat in these somewhat uninviting waters. For one thing, the river was several times wider than it is today, and the creek of the Poddle, the dark pool where the Vikings landed, is now marked only by an inconspicuous grating. The Poddle formed a natural moat around the eastern end of the Vikings' 9th century settlement. We can't see it now, although its valley is still visible as a dip in the road. But at least we can still see the hill on which the first city of Dublin was built. Less than 70 feet above sea level, but still the most defensible place in the area, a good place from which to command the foot of Bridge Street, which was the lowest crossing of the most accessible estuary on the most accessible side of Ireland. It was a site that appealed to the Normans as well as the Vikings, and around this hill the visitor can find all the features of a medieval Norman town, if he looks hard enough, that is. The Middle Ages seldom obtrude themselves in Ireland's urban landscapes. Modern history has been too destructive for that. But there's still a cluster of parish churches to mark the area of densest medieval population. Their names are old, even if the buildings themselves have been replaced. Then there is the cathedral, 2 cathedrals in fact, introducing the Dublin habit of unnecessary duplication. The city wall with its gates and archways, and a massive 13th century castle to guard its weakest corner, and a close network of narrow and irregular streets, not all of which have been widened in modern times. The leading industrial quarter of 18th century Dublin was the southwest, where a large population of textile workers could draw their water supply from the River Poddle and its branches. Today there is little trace of their activities except a few place names and a ruinous weaver's hall. But as in so many Irish towns, the manufacture of alcoholic beverages has left a more lasting mark, most obvious in the great brewing establishment which came to occupy a larger built-up area than the whole of medieval Dublin. The northwest was another dominantly commercial quarter, more noted for markets than for industry. In this area, Phoenix Park assumed its present function in 1747, but unlike London's Regent Park, it failed to attract the wealthy resident to its perimeter. Perhaps he was put off by the large traffic in cattle that entered this part of the city from the plains of Meath. It was to the east of the old medieval kernel that one found most of the nobility and gentry of Georgian Dublin. In the southeast, a wave of high-class residential building lapped around the great bastions of the 18th century ascendancy, the Parliament Building, Trinity College, Leinster House. Further out, where estates were held in whole townlands or blocks of townlands, there was scope for more radical planning. This was where the Fitzwilliam family began in the 1750s with 2 almost empty country roads, the ancestors of the modern Bagot Street and Leeson Street, and added a new pattern of wide, straight streets and noble squares. At one stage it was proposed to line these thoroughfares with Dutch gabled houses in the early 18th century manner. Instead, the Fitzwilliam estate became the showplace of the famous late Georgian Dublin house. Solidity, discretion, sobriety, a sense of proportion. Whether or not these were typical Dublin qualities, the style certainly lasted a long time. Fitzwilliam Square was not finished until 1820, and nearly half a century later, houses of the same type were still going up a mile further out in the Victorian suburbs of Rathmines and Rathgar. The northeast of Georgian Dublin was an upper-class residential zone remarkably like the southeast. There was the same dominant landowning family, in this case the Gardeners. There were the same old country roads, here Dorset Street and Summer Hill, leading towards the original Liffey Bridge. Rutland Square and Mountjoy Square formed part of the same kind of modern rectilinear street pattern. And in the early 19th century, each neighbourhood was completed by a strategically placed Protestant church, St. Stephen's in the south, St. George's in the north.